Hello dear students, myself Dr. Sachin Arjun Gurule, Assistant Professor from KTHM College, Nasik. In the previous lecture of Entomology First, we have started with the chapter 4 Morphology of Insect, and we are discussing the morphology of head of generalized insect and completed the topic, that is head orientation, and have started with the topic head skeleton. Now head skeleton is composed of the two parts, the head sutures and the head sclerites or the areas, of which we have already completed with the head sutures, and in this video we are going to learn the head sclerites or the areas. So let's see, first of all, before start with the head sclerite, let us have a quick summary whatever sutures we have discussed into the previous lecture. The first suture we have discussed, that is Clypeo-labral suture, which present between the labrum and Clypeus. Then second suture we have discussed the Clypeo-frontal suture, which is also referred as the epistomal suture. Then third suture we have discussed, that is epicranial suture, which is also referred as ecdysial suture, which is present in between the frons and the epicranium. Then next one is the occipital suture. This occipital suture is present between the area known as the epicranium and the occiput. Then the post-occipital suture. Post-occipital suture is present between the occiput and the post-occiput. Then after we have discussed the suture known as the subgenal suture. And subgenal suture is responsible for dividing the frons area from that of the gena. Then the subgenal suture. Subgenal suture is consists of, or is a composite suture which consists of the pleurostomal suture and the hypostomal suture. Then the next suture we have discussed, that is ocular suture, which encircling the compound eyes, and the last suture is the antenna. Now, due to the presence of this suture, the whole area of an insect head is divisible into the different areas, and these areas are generally referred as the head sclerites, which we are going to learn in this topic. So let's start with the head sclerite or the areas. The cuticular areas can be seen on the external surface of the head. So here you can see the different areas, which are nothing but the cuticular areas which can recognize on the insect head, and this is only get formed due to the presence of a different kinds of the suture on the area of insect head. They become well evident after dechitinization. Now dechitinization is the process by which whatever chitin content of the skeleton is there, which is generally removed, and this dechitinization can be achieved by treating that particular part with the aqueous KOH at the high temperature. Now all these areas of the insect head capsule are also known as the head sclerites. The sclerites represent simply the intersutural areas. Intersutural areas in the sense the area which is present between the two different sutures. For example, if you see this area which is known as a Clypeus, it is present between the two suture. From the anterior side it is a Clypeo-labral suture, and from posterior side it is bounded by the Clypeo-frontal suture or epistomal suture. Means in between this Clypeo-labral and the Clypeo-frontal suture, whatever areas is there, it is referred as intersutural areas. So all these sclerites, they are get formed in between the two different sutures. Now insect head generally exhibiting a different kinds of the sclerites or as follows. So first sclerite which is located at the anterior most part of the insect head, which is known as labrum. The next one is Clypeus. Then third one is the frons. The next one is the epicranium. Then next one is a occiput. Then post-occiput. After that this one is a gena. Then ocular sclerite and antennal sclerite. So these are the different kinds of the sclerites which can easily be recognized on the head of a generalized insect. So let's see one by one all these sclerites. So start first of all with the labrum. Now labrum is a widely discussed structure of the insect head, and some workers have regarded this labrum as a fused segmental appendage, which is now universally accepted that is a sclerite or the first sclerite of the insect head, and not having any significance of the segmental appendage of the segment belongs to the head is concerned. So now it is well established is a first sclerite of the insect head. Now this labrum is freely attached to the lower margin of the Clypeus by the suture which is referred as a clypeolabral suture. Generally, this labrum is hang over the mouth or the preoral cavity. As is a hang just above the preoral cavity, it is also termed as the upper lip, particularly in case of the mandibulate kind of the insects. But in fluid feeding insect, this labrum may undergoes a various modification. But generally, in a mandibulate insect, the labrum internally it forms a anterior part of epipharyngeal wall of the preoral cavity and is internally lined with the gustatory receptors. These gustatory receptors are concerned with the taste of the food material, and this labrum can move upward, downwards, and can be pulled and pushed to the some extent, and whatever movement which is shown by this labrum, that is forward, backward, or the pulled and push, this is only due to the elastic nature of the suture and whatever muscles which are going to innervate into the labrum region. So this movement is due to the presence of the muscles of the labrum, and the labrum is innervated by three types of muscles. Now first one is a compressor labral muscle, second one is a anterior labral muscle, and third one is a posterior labral muscle. So let's see one by one. First of all, the compressor labral muscles. Now compressor labral muscles are occurs in a pair on a lateral side or either on a single median one. So this is the location, follow the pointer. So this is actually the location of that compressor labral muscle from the internal side of the labrum. Either it occurs in a pair or either it may occurs in a single region in the center. So they are attached by one end on the anterior and by other end on the posterior wall of that labrum itself. The compressor muscles bring about the retraction, prolongation, and contraction of the labrum. So this kind of the movement is due to the first, that is compressor muscle. Then second variety of muscle is the anterior labral muscle. So here these are the anterior labral muscle. Now these anterior labral muscles are paired but unbranched muscles. They originate from the inner surface of the frons. So if you imagine the position of the labrum, immediate to the labrum there is a Clypeus, and then after the region is known as a frons. Means these anterior muscles, they are coming from the frons and they are innervated into the labrum. Now these muscles move the labrum in a forward direction. In the forward direction, whatever forward movement is there for that labrum is contributed by this anterior labral muscle. So this is about the anterior labral muscle. The next one is the posterior labral muscle. Now the posterior labral muscles are also paired muscle, but most importantly they are the branched labral muscle. Again they originate from the anterolateral region of the frons, and these muscles, that is the posterior labral muscle, pulls the labrum in a backward. Means anterior muscles, they gives a forward direction, and the posterior muscle pulls it in a backward condition. Now whatever movement which is shown by that labrum in the mandibulate insects due to the presence of these muscles is very important, because these kind of the mouth parts are found into the insect which feeds on a solid food material, and the mandibles, they are bringing out the grinding action and which is responsible for cutting the solid food material into the smaller pieces. And when that mandibles are operating, if the labrum is not moved from their place, because at the resting condition it is very closely applied with the mandibles only. So it is may have the chance, if the labrum do not shows any kind of the movement, then it is very much possible that the labrum may interfere with the sharp edges of the mandibles, and which is responsible for causing the cutting of labrum itself, and hence the movement of the labrum is necessary, which is contributed by these muscles. So this is about the first sclerite, that is labrum. Then second one is a clypeus. Now clypeus, this is the second sclerite of the insect head, which is demarcated by the clypeolabral suture from the anterior side and clypeofrontal suture from the posterior side. Thus it occupies the position in between the anterior labral and posterior frons or frontal sclerite. In some insects, this clypeus is completely or partially divided into the two parts by a transverse suture. So here, if you see closely in this diagram, you can able to make out the small dotted line, which is representing a transverse suture. The transverse suture is not always present in all insects, but in some insect, when this transverse suture is present, the whole sclerite, that is known as a clypeus, is divisible into the two parts, posterior part and anterior part. So this is the anterior part and this is a posterior part. So posterior part of the clypeus is referred as a post-clypeus, while the anterior part of the clypeus is known as the anteclypeus. Now keep remember, so this anteclypeus and post-clypeus is present when and when there is a presence of a transverse suture at a median area of the clypeal region. Now both these part, that is post-clypeus and the anteclypeus, is well evident in case of the house cricket. The post-clypeus is modifies into the convex processes. So out of which this posterior part of the clypeus, due to the presence of transverse suture known as a post-clypeus, in some cases it is modified into the convex process, and that convex process is termed as the ginglymus of the mandible, and that ginglymus of the mandible is generally found into the arthropteroid insect. For example, in the grasshoppers, many species of the grasshopper, the post-clypeus becomes a somewhat convex one, and which is going to form the ginglymus. So this sclerite, that is clypeus, is of the head, which is provided with the cibarial dilator muscles. So whatever cibarial dilator muscles are there, which are going to innervate from the inner side of the clypeus. These cibarial dilator muscles are very important, because which is responsible for dilating the cavity of the cibarial pump, and that muscles are innervated from the inner side of this sclerite known as the clypeus. So this is about the clypeus. The next one is the frons. Now frons is extend from the anterior clypeofrontal suture. So this is a clypeofrontal suture, which is also referred as epistomal suture, to the posterior. So this is posterior frontal suture. So the frons occurs between the clypeofrontal suture and the frontal suture. In arthropteroid insect, it may possesses a single median ocellus, and in other cases it may bear a lateral ocelli also. So here in this diagram you can see the lateral ocelli as well as median ocelli, both they are lies in a frons. But however, in some cases the lateral ocelli, they may occupies the other region known as a parietal region. So here in this kind of the diagram you can see this is the region known as a frons, which only contains a median ocelli. In some cases all the three ocelli may occurs into the region of frons, and in other cases only the median ocellus is lies in among the frons region. So however, when the clypeofrontal suture remains ill defined, or when this suture is indistinct or obscure, at that time the anterior temporal pit reveals the demarcation of the sclerite from that of the clypeal region. Means in some insects, for example in the cockroaches, this clypeofrontal suture is indistinct one. Then how to demarcate between the Clypeus and Frons? You have to see the position of anterior temporal pit, as these pits are always lies on the clypeofrontal suture. So in cockroaches the suture is not present, but you can able to make out the anterior temporal pit, and where the anterior temporal pit is located. So this is a demarcating boundary in between the Clypeus and the Frons. The Frons represent typically the upper facial region. So this is the facial region of the insect head, and the pharyngeal dilator, labral hypopharyngeal muscles and the adductor muscles of mandibles are usually inserted on the middle of this Frons region. Means physiologically this Frons is also very important, because it is giving a site of attachment for a various kind of the muscles. For example, the pharyngeal dilator muscles, labral hypopharyngeal muscles and the adductor muscles of the mandible, all these are attached from the inner side of the frontal region. So this is about the sclerite known as the Frons. The next one is the epicranium. The epicranial suture separates the epicranium from that of the Frons. So this is a epicranial suture which is inverted Y-shaped suture, which is responsible for separating the Frons from that of the epicranium. So this part, whole part just above the frontal suture, this is referred as the epicranium. It represents the entire upper region of the insect head. It extends from the anterior frontal to the posterior occipital suture. Here you can see, so this is a frontal suture, means this epicranium begins here and it extends up to the occipital suture. So this is a occipital suture. So whatever area which is present between this frontal suture and occipital suture, so this whole area is referred as the epicranium. Above the Frons, it is divided by the coronal suture into the two exactly identical lateral plates, and these lateral plates are referred as the parietal. Means in some insects, the stem of the Y, which is known as a coronal suture, is present. This coronal suture is responsible for dividing the part of the epicranium into the exactly the two lateral portion, and these lateral portions are referred as the parietals. Now these parietals are characterized by having a three structure. First one is an antennae, second one is a lateral ocelli, and third one is the compound eyes. The posterior most undivided region, here this is a undivided region where this coronal suture is not extended. So the part of the epicranium which remains undivided, it is referred as the vertex. Here you can see in the label in this diagram. So this is the uppermost part where the head is not divided, is referred as the vertex. It forms exactly the top of the head. So this is in this diagram you can see. So this is the topmost portion of the insect head which is remains undivided, and this is referred as the vertex. The independent status of the vertex as a complete different sclerite is still a controversial subject. Hence this vertex, it is the included as a part of the epicranium sclerite only. So this is about the epicranium. The next one is the occiput. Now occiput is a U-shaped posterior cuticular band. It represents the areas from the occipital to the post-occipital suture. So here in this diagram you can see, so this is a occipital suture and this one is a post-occipital suture. So the area which lies between these occipital and post-occipital suture is referred as the occiput, is a sclerite. And among the higher insect, however, this occiput as a sclerite is absent, or this occipital suture is obscure. So this is about the occiput. The next one is the post-occiput. The post-occipital foramen, occipital foramen is enclosed from the dorsal and lateral side. So this is a occipital foramen which is enclosed from the dorsal side as well as from the lateral side by a narrow sclerite, and this narrow sclerite is referred as the post-occiput. So this area is referred as the post-occiput. It lies between the occiput and the neck. So this is a occiput and this part is a neck. So in between that occiput and neck, the sclerite is referred as the post-occiput. Post-occiput is marked off from the occiput by a transverse post-occipital suture. Now this post-occipital suture is a demarcating boundary between the occiput and post-occiput, but in some insects, when the post-occipital suture is absent or remains obscure or indistinct, you have to see the position of posterior temporal pits, as these posterior temporal pits are always lies on post-occipital suture. Means in some insects, when this suture is absent, you have to see the posterior position of the posterior temporal pit, which is a demarcating boundary between the occiput and the post-occiput. Similarly, we have discussed about that clypeofrontal suture. When this clypeofrontal suture is absent, the demarcating boundary is the position of anterior temporal pit. Likewise, here when the post-occipital suture is absent, you have to see the position of posterior temporal pit, which lies exactly on that post-occipital suture and which is a demarcating point of the occiput from that of the post-occiput. Now the dorsal thoracic muscles are attached to the endoskeletal ridges of post-occipital suture. Means whatever muscles which are coming from the prothoracic part, these are attached to the ridges which are provided by that post-occipital sclerite. So these muscles articulates the head freely with that of the thoracic part, and the anterolateral inner margin of the post-occiput produces a small process, and this small process is referred as the occipital condyle. So this is about the sclerite known as the post-occiput. The next one is the Genae and the post-genal areas. Genae is a plural word, singular is a gena. The gena represent the lateral areas of the insect head. So these are the lateral areas of the insect head. In this diagram you can see, so this is a lateral region of the insect head which is referred as the gena, and plural is a genae. So on either side, the gena extends from the compound eyes and to the mandibular trochanter. It starts from the compound eyes from the posterior side, and at the anterior side it has a mandibular trochanter. The hinder part develops into the socket to accommodate the mandibular condyle. So these are the mandibular condyle. Posterior to the occipital suture, each lateral gena is commonly called as the post-gena. So in this diagram you can see, so this is known as the occiput, and the posterior most part of that post-occiput, which also lies from the lateral side, often it is referred as the post-gena. Now each post-gena provides a condylar articulation to the maxillae. So whatever maxillae is there, which are going to articulate with the processes of that post-gena. The subgenal areas above and below the mandible can be referred to as the pleurostoma and hypostoma respectively, that we have already discussed into the first lecture. That is, the subgenal suture is a composite suture which is forming a pleurostomal suture and the hypostomal suture, forming the pleurostoma and the hypostoma respectively. Now these areas are separated in some insects by the suture known as the hypostomal suture. So this is a hypostomal suture, and similarly the pleurostomal suture. So this is a pleurostomal suture which separates the pleurostoma from the base of the mandible. So this is the basal region of the mandible which separate from that pleurostoma with the suture known as pleurostomal suture. So this is about the gena and post-genal areas. The next sclerite is the ocular sclerite, which is very simple one. So this ocular sclerite forms a cuticular ring around each compound eye. So you can see, so this is a cuticular ring around the compound eyes, means this cuticular ocular suture along with the compound eyes, they are going to form a sclerite which is known as the ocular sclerite. So all in this diagram you can see, so this is a ocular suture, and ocular suture enclosing the compound eyes is referred as the ocular sclerite. And the last one is the antennal sclerite. So antennal sclerite forms an annulus. This annulus is located at the base of each antenna. So here in this diagram also you can see, so this is the antennal sclerite. Now actually antennal sclerite is composed of the antennal suture inclusion of the antennae. Means antennae together with the antennal suture forms a sclerite known as the antennal sclerite. Now this antennal sclerite is very well developed into the insects, belongs to the order known as the Plecoptera. So this is about the different kinds of the suture. So let's see a quick summary whatever sclerites or the areas we have discussed in this lecture. The anterior most sclerite of the insect head is known as the labrum. Then posterior to the labrum is a second sclerite known as the Clypeus, followed by the next sclerite known as the Frons, then the Epicranium. The coronal suture divides the epicranium into the equally sized lateral areas which are known as the parietals, and this parietal contains a three structure, that is antennae, lateral ocelli and compound eyes. Then undivided part of the epicranium is referred as the vertex. The next sclerite we have discussed, that is the occiput, which lies between the occipital suture and post-occipital suture. The next sclerite we have discussed, the closed occipital sclerite, which lies between the occiput and the neck. The next sclerite we have discussed, that is a Genae and Post-genal area, which lies between the Frons and the occiput. Then posterior most part of the occiput is having a lateral areas which are referred as the post-genal. Then we have discussed this ocular suture of the compound eyes, and the last one is a antennal sclerite including the antennal suture and the antennae. So this is about the head sclerite and the areas. So with this we have completed with the insect head skeleton. Thank you very much.